Welcome back to part 2 of tonight's Football Out West show. It's good to have everyone back on board. We've got Craig Filer, we've got Steve Kern, myself, Tonchi Prusak, and our very, very special guest, DAMIAN RODEN, tonight as well. So it's good to have everyone back on board. And DAMIAN, how are you? Are you there? Can you hear us?
Can you hear me? I was just sending a message saying I can't unmute, but I think I've solved it now.
There we go. You can hear us now. We can hear you. Okay, folks, massive apologies. It's IT issues beyond our control. It seems like there was some sort of maintenance being done on the Be Live website. They are US based, so they probably think we're in the middle of the night, dead hours or something like that for them. But we're prime time peak hour here. And we can see people coming back on board slowly but surely. So we'll try and proceed for the next, I'd say, 45 minutes to an hour with our guest all the way from the UK. DAMIAN, thank you once again for joining us. And I must apologise on behalf of the team, but also on behalf of myself. It looks like I was the problem, kids. I did say at the top of the show that Be Live, yep, it's a very, very reliable platform. That what we operate in, yep, we're not going to get hacked like Tom Byers did on his Zoom recently. Lo and behold, Craig Filer, as soon as I said it, you know, the devil's gone on a rampage, eh?
Yeah, that was definitely going to happen. It was obvious, but I do apologise to all the listeners. We are now back and looking forward to a fantastic, as we said, half hour, 40 minutes with our fantastic guest.
Yeah, the numbers are coming.
Who wants to stay with us as long as he can? Otherwise, he's got to go shopping for a dog.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Now, DAMIAN, apart from being a dog lover, do tell us a little bit more about your background. We started getting into that before we were interrupted, but tell us a bit about how you got into football. You'll probably be repeating yourself, but I see.
I was worrying that I just turned all the listeners off and they decided it's time to go to bed. So it's nice to know that it was a technical fault. Yeah. I'll sort of say what I just said. Like probably many of the listeners, I grew up with aspirations to be a professional footballer. I'm from Wrexham, which has shot to fame recently with Ryan Reynolds buying the club. He now owns our club, and we get 9,000-10,000 fans in a non-league game, so it's a little bit of a unique situation here. I played here for 3-4 years, and then got the opportunity to go over to America to play in the United States Interregional Soccer League. It was at the time with Columbus. I came to the reality after that I'm not going to be a Premier League footballer, and I'm not going to make a living out of the game. So I went through the FA of Wales coaching courses, got my pro license. At the same time, I went back to school and did a sports science and coaching degree and a master's in exercise and nutrition science. And things started to open up for me as soon as I came to completing both my pro license and masters at the same time. I was then recruited by Sam Allardyce as the first team fitness coach at Bolton Wanderers. In their years of the time when they're in the Premier League and overachieving, a really, really enjoyable experience. And then I got the opportunity to work with Mark Hughes at Blackburn Rovers. Now, Mark was a Man United player. He's from Wrexham. He's Welsh. So he ticked all the boxes of my boyhood hero. So I jumped at that chance to go in as head of sports science at Blackburn Rovers. I then went with him to Manchester City. And I was due to take up a role with the Socceroos after my time at Man City, but I got a clot in my leg that stopped me from travelling for 9 months, so that put paid to that. But then I got I started the same role with Wales under Gary Speed, 2011. Thoroughly enjoyable experience with the national team, a different experience to club football. And then I moved on again with Mark at Queen's Park Rangers as head of sports science, Stoke City, and then spent 2 years in the MLS with Seattle Sounders before returning back to Europe and working with Anderlecht, as I do now, as the director of performance. Hopefully listeners are still there.
They've all switched off. They've got to get
That's the short version as well. Yeah.
If you don't mind, I'll start the questions off. If you don't mind, guys. You mentioned Sam Allardyce there, and I remember back in the day as a younger coach, Sam Allardyce, I suppose, Damien, was seen as one of the early innovators of sports science. You obviously had, the ex-Arsenal coach. What was his name? French lad, was in Japan. What's the
Arsene Wenger?
Arsene Wenger. He came in, but Sam Allardyce was one of those early inventors of, I suppose, of sports science. What did you learn from your time there at Bolton under Sam? And was that really where it kicked off for you in your role as you are now?
Yeah, he was. I mean, I don't think he ever gets enough credit, largely because of his style of play. But his style of play was born out of the club that he was at the time, and the players he had. So he played in a certain way that got success. And yes, he's continued to play in that way when he's gone on to different clubs and also with England, but largely because he's had success. So I don't think he gets enough credit for how innovative he was. He surrounded himself with people in different areas like psychology, physiology. The psychologists would do psychometric questionnaires, for example, back in the early 2000s of the staff and of the players to make sure they were a fit for the group, not just on the pitch, but the team behind the team, so to speak. And he picked a lot of that up from he spent some time playing in America, but then he went round NBA, NFL teams and just picked up all the best pieces. So his attention to detail on planning and periodization at the time was groundbreaking. No one was looking at periodization in football. And his sidekick, if you like, Mark Taylor, who was the head of the performance department at the time, was instrumental in that. He'd look at 6-week cycles and break down the 6-week cycles into weeks and the weeks into training sessions. So there was never a training session that was a missed opportunity. It was all about leading into the game in preparation for who the opposition were. He was using cryotherapy back in early 2000s that a lot of teams are using now, and Australia being at the forefront of sports science. He was embracing all those things, at the same time you guys, the Australian Institute of Sport, were producing innovative training methods and innovative recovery methods. He was doing the same over here. And his analysis, he had an analysis team of 3 or 4 people that would just really scrutinize what the opposition strengths and weaknesses were and make recommendations about how to break them down ultimately. So he was just paying attention to detail in every single aspect that he could use.
All right, well, I'll jump in there. Let's talk a little bit about Vincent Kompany, who's now a very young senior coach at Anderlecht. Your relationship with him goes back to when he was a player, though. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, how that all came together and how that's working now now that he's a coach and you're helping him in that phase of his career?
Yeah, I was really flattered, to be honest. I was in Seattle and I got a call from him, and I spoke to him sporadically since the time that I worked with him. So I was really quite flattered when I got a call. And he remembers the 2 years that I worked with him at Manchester City. He was injury free. I think the last year that I worked with him, he said he played 37 out of 38 Premier League games, and he attributes that to him being managed differently to others. We had a team periodization model, but because of his makeup, because of his stature, because of his injury history, we sort of managed him slightly differently to try and make sure that he was always available. And he remembered that, and going into management, having spent best part of 3-4 years with Pep Guardiola, arguably one of the best coaches in the world. Technically, tactically, he knew exactly what he wanted to achieve and how he wants to play. But he wanted to know, right, based on that, based on what I want to do in possession, out of possession, in transition, how do I keep all my best players fit? Because when he took over at Anderlecht, they'd been running to the ground a little bit financially, so he didn't have endless amount of money to invest in players. He had to embrace the youth. He had to sell his best players. So he wanted all his assets available, and that's when he asked would I be interested to go and sort of, you know, advise him and mentor him and give him sort of tell him how not to make the mistakes that I made when I first started, or the mistakes that young coaches starting out make. So I was the physical piece, if you like, when he started the job.
Damien, after a spell in the Premier League, you then went to America, and we saw in the first part of the show, before it was interrupted, we saw a clip there of when you during your time at the Seattle Sounders. Now, American professional sport is really renowned for being very innovative and being, you know, far ahead of its ahead of the rest of the world. When you went to the Major League Soccer of America, how did you find that from a performance point of view, from a sports science point of view, compared to what you'd seen in Europe?
Without being detrimental, I was quite surprised. The club had a very, very good reputation for being one of the pioneers in sports science, which was, you know, one of the things that appealed to me.
Seattle, we're talking about.
Yes.
Yep.
But when I went there, I was surprised what wasn't in place. You know, just things like the basics of the facilities were okay. The training pitches were okay, but there was only one training pitch. There was no gym. There was no nutrition provision, and the general intensity of training was sort of sporadic. It was player-led, rather than sort of being of a real high intensity. It was sometimes it was really good, sometimes it wasn't. It was surprising. I was used to, if the players weren't leading it in the Premier League, the manager would step in and, guys, what's happening? As I'm sure, you know, is the same in Australia, where you demand quality, and you have to demand quality because players need to be on top of their game every day. It was a little bit more relaxed. So as I said, I was just surprised about what wasn't in place more than, like you just said, you expect America to have everything, resources, analysis, every aspect of sports science, if you like, in play. And I think in the NFL and the NBA and baseball and what American would class as the top three sports, that is the case. They have a massive team of staff. They individualize a lot of things. They go into real detail on nutrition, and that is the case. But it certainly wasn't the case when I first started in the MLS, which was quite surprising.
Just a question. Yeah. I'm a coach myself. I love the old sports science, and I said to the guys earlier on, I wish I was a bit younger that I could understand it a little bit better. How hard is it to build, I suppose, staff and player cohesion? Because you're going to be effectively telling a coach what type of sessions to put on based on the games that you've been played or what you've got coming up. How hard is it to bring that all together to make them understand that actually you're there to try and help them, not be a burden on them? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think, like in life, it depends on the person, it depends on the coach, it depends on the philosophy. But I've had this question many, many times, and my best answer is, and it's also things that come into play when I consider taking on a job, another job opportunity, is if the coach has a game model and he knows exactly what he wants, it's very, very easy, because that's the reference point. So if the coach wants to do certain things in possession, out of possession, in transition, you know how intense those aspects are. And because the training model is all about managing intensity, managing whether you go in big spaces on one day, if you go in small space on another day, if you do certain things in relation to the previous game, if you do certain things in relation to the next game, it's very easy to go, okay, you know what you want to do that there, that there, that there, that there. Are you happy that you've covered everything from a technical, tactical aspect? Yes, perfect. I'm happy from a physical aspect. It works really, really nicely. The difficulty lies is if the coach doesn't have a clear picture and a clear idea, and it's pretty much, right, what are we going to do today, guys? That's when chaos starts to occur and problems start to arise. So I think it starts with the coach's knowledge of how they want to play. And if they know exactly how they want to play, the rest is fairly simple. It's just a conversation and getting structured and organized. So using Vincent Kompany as an example, it was just music to my ears listening to him when he was telling me how he wants to play, because it was really, really simple to say, okay, that's fine. So first day after a game, we'll ease them back in, but we can still do an element of performance analysis, because he likes to do it in the classroom. The next day is the conditioning session, and he likes to press high, and he likes to play through the thirds really, really quickly, or keep possession, but fast, intense, flowing football. So whatever we would want to do, it was always at an intensity. And then he understood if we did that intensity in 9v9, 10v10 on that one day, the following day we go 5v5, 6v6, 4v4, just so it's a contrast the next day. You're not overexerting the same energy system, overexerting the same muscles and joints. And it was a simple conversation. He knew exactly what he wanted to achieve to get the message across to the players, and he just wanted to know how to piece it together and when to do it. So as I said, it was simple to do in that sense.
And has the sorry, Steve, and has the sorry, mate, it's part of the same question. So has the modern game, is it very different now to what it used to be, given the fact from your side of things, given the number of games that teams play now and the lack of time in between games? We spoke about it off air earlier on with the guys. You know, you've got the EPL or the Belgian A-League, whatever. Then they've got a game in 2 days' time. Then they've got the European qualifiers. Then you've got the World Cup qualifiers. Is it much different now for you guys as strength and conditioning or development coaches?
Yeah, a little bit. But the easiest way to sort of relate to the listeners that I can get across is you work on principles, and if the principles don't change. So principle one is always recovery. So if you've got a game Saturday, game Tuesday, the emphasis is obviously on recovery. But if you've got a game Saturday to Saturday, your first principle is still recovery. Your second principle is team organisation. And then your third principle is on conditioning. So you can look at your fixture list over the course of the season, and you know you'll have periods where you've got midweek games. You've got periods where you haven't. You've got time to do certain things. But if you look at that each game and say, right, the first 2 days after the game, recovery. Last 2 training sessions before a game, team organisation. And then it'll tell you whether you can work on any component of conditioning. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But you're not going to lose your fitness from week to week. But if it happens all the time, then your fitness will start to drop. So you determine by the schedule, but whenever the schedule permits and you use those 3 key principles, you're going to be able to nudge your players forward and still keep them available, but in better condition each time you play.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thanks. Steve?
Yeah, and just looking at that model, assuming we've got a full-time professional squad at our disposal and we're playing on Saturday, we've got no game until the following Saturday. Can you sort of break down that week for our listeners as to how you would balance out the recovery, the conditioning, and then the match preparation over the course of those 7 days?
No, I think we've got some slides that we might bring up as well as you're talking about it, if you don't mind, Damien.
Yeah, that's perfect, actually. And it's a really good illustration to show you how Vincent employed the model at Anderlecht. But more importantly, to note he's not had any soft tissue injuries for the best part of 18 months by following this, and he really grasps the physiology and the physical component. So yes, you've got a game on a Saturday. The Sunday is a training session for the players that haven't played, and it's the same sort of session as a condition session within the week that I'll talk about in a second. It's just to overload them in a football setting so that they're always in the same cycle as the players that have played on that Saturday. Players that played on the Saturday, on that Sunday, would do a recovery session. Monday would always be off. So when I talked about the principle one being recovery, Sunday and Monday is for the players that play on the Saturday is either recovery, then off. It gives the players that have played on that Saturday 48 hours to fully recover until the next training session. The guys that train on the Sunday, they have a day off, and then everybody returns back on the Tuesday, which is match day -4. But I'll go back to principle 2. You can see there Thursday and Friday match day -2, -1. Principle 2 is on team organisation. So that's where all your tactical work would be done, in possession, out of possession, leading into that next Saturday game. And you can see you tapering off in terms of loading to make sure players are fresh going into that Saturday. And then principle 3, the Tuesday and the Wednesday, the match day -4, -3, that's your conditioning period. But the important thing for me is, after a period of rest, after a day off, first training session back after a game, players are their least mobile. Players still will be stiff. So the Tuesday is just about getting the players moving again, getting the coordination and control back, getting some tone in the muscles. And then that Wednesday is when you really, really hit them hard.
So just on that, sorry to interrupt you there. So for the listeners that are looking down on the Tuesday there, Tons, if you just go back on the right-hand side, there's a list of stuff. So duration, 60 minutes, warm-up, mobility, avoid any sprinting altogether, technical, extensive, tactical overload, underload before you start ramping it to the match day -3. Is that correct? Yeah.
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 And this is often in my experience is where a lot of coaches will want to do hard work. Now, if you want to do hard work on that Tuesday, you maybe flip the recovery side around. So you have a day off on the Sunday, and then you do a very, very light easing session on the Monday because you want to step it up on the Tuesday. But for me, then you miss the opportunity for the players that haven't played on that Saturday to get a session to make sure they're always in optimal condition. But yeah, it's all about just easing them back in. Now, that's not to say there's nothing you can't do. It's just you wouldn't do loads and loads of repetitive shooting from 25, 30 meters and crossing from the touchline, because they're really explosive actions. You wouldn't use big spaces where players really open their legs and sprint for the reasons I just said. It's the first training session back. The muscles are at the shortest. Some players may still be a little bit fatigued from the game if it's been a hard game at the weekend. And the players that train on the Sunday may have also carried a little bit over into that Tuesday session. So it's almost like a primer ready to really hit them hard on the Wednesday.
Perfect.
And then, yeah, Thursday, Friday, it's just about tapering from that Wednesday conditioning session. So it's shorter duration. The load is a lot less. It's more about stop and start, if you like, if you want to use that word, tactical work. And again, Thursday, it's at the coach's discretion, but Thursday is typically how we want to prepare out of possession. Friday then becomes how we want to prepare in possession, because we're going into the game all about us. Now, that doesn't mean that the intensity is low on any of those days. The intensity is always at match intensity. Even on the Tuesday, it's just the types of session that you would want to use. You always want players to be in an environment where they have to think fast, they have to make decisions quickly, they have to execute the technique based on those decisions. It's just the loading, total loading, because of the duration, the type of work that you do, is less compared to maybe the overload session on that Wednesday.
Awesome. Now, earlier this year, Damien, you presented at the I think it was the Welsh. It was the
Welsh FA convention. Yeah,
that's the one. Yeah. We're going to bring something like that on the screen at the moment. So we'll just play that, and you can kind of guide us through that.
Yeah. So everything you'll see here of it, all the components that hopefully use.
Bring the volume down a bit, Tom.
How's that?
Yeah, it's all the ingredients that a coach will use globally, whether it's in Australia, whether it's in Belgium, whether it's in America, whether it's in England. And based on the model that you just showed in terms of a typical training week, I've just devised guidelines as to what a warm-up looks like on that given day, what technical exercise looks like on that given day, what a possession game looks like, what a game looks like, what shooting activities, and so on and so forth. So these are just some visuals and illustrations of all the things that that you need to consider as a coach, and I'm sure you do consider as a coach. It's just understanding how they all piece together, really. So this is just, as I said, an illustration and a few video clips of the types of activities.
What I find fascinating is this camera. Was it a drone or whatever? But it really puts everything into perspective of the formations and the positioning on the field and what you're not. And often a lot of coaches don't have this at their disposal. But seeing it the way you've done it, and there's the players obviously having a little bit of fun, and that's an important part of everything, isn't it? But it just puts everything into perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's something that's, you know, certainly prevalent in Europe. I'm not sure, you know, how prevalent it is in Australia. You know, some clubs are the same in the US, in my experience. Some clubs don't have it, but players learn in different ways. So some players only learn on the pitch. Some players learn from the tactics board. Some players learn by being asked questions, but some players learn by seeing that overhead visual, because a lot of the training session plans are in that format. So it's just another layer of trying to get the players to understand their role in possession, out of possession, in transition.
And does it change from club to club, or does that go back to your original answer where it depends on what the coach has? Because I heard you saying on a podcast some time ago that, you know, the coaches that maybe plan from what's going to happen tomorrow to the guys that plan for 6 weeks ahead are very, very different. So does it change from club to club, or is the philosophy around the same?
Yeah, I'd say it changes dramatically from club to club in my experience, but also when you speak to people. You know, there's some successful teams that if you break it down, you wonder how they are successful, because they don't do a lot of what you would class as aspects that would make them successful. But there's also clubs that are not successful and they do everything in their power. So it's, you know, it's getting that balance, I think. But it does range dramatically from club to club, down to resources, down to, as you said, the manager or the coach's philosophy, down to, you know, how things have been successful for that group of people in the past in clubs they worked at before. So there's quite an array of different approaches and different resources available, I think.
Damien, one of the things I was wondering was training players specifically for the conditioning required for their positions, just strikers compared to a central defender or a winger or a central midfielder. How difficult is it to implement that as a coach?
My answer's changed, or my response to that question has changed from when I first did my sports science degree and first started my coaching qualifications to the experience I have now. And I'm I think more on the coaching side than the sports science side, but applying sports science principles. And I'm a massive believer of doing everything through football. So if you're doing everything through football, and I'm a centre forward and I'm playing 11v11, I'm putting all the things that I need to do into practice in that 11v11, maybe less frequently than I would do if I'm a centre forward in a 7v7 game. But I'm still having to think about what my role is in possession, out of possession, in transition. And the coach still needs to impart their knowledge and what that centre forward needs to do. But if you're always working in football, you're always interacting in a realistic environment with your players and the people that you communicate and interact with. So I would always say do everything through football, but then as a supplement, if a centre forward just isn't doing that when you're playing football, then you factor in certain aspects of their game and work one-to-one or work in small groups, either structure it within part of that training model, or you do it in isolation at the appropriate time. So I think there's not one size fits all, but for me, if you're always putting players in a problem-solving environment, realistically, they're going to learn more than if you keep pulling them out. And so when the ball's there and you're here and I want you to make a run there, so okay, put them in that environment. They've got to make that decision, because in the game, it's not exactly how you would do it in isolation. You've got to try and pose as many different problems. For me, from my point of view, you've got to try and pose as many different problems as you can for that player so they can select the right option in the game. rather than it being too prescriptive. They've got to think for themselves.
Damien, I wanted to ask, we've seen immense changes as far as technology and the use of technology in the modern game, whether it be GPS tracking of individual players, VAR, obviously, which has become very notorious, I suppose, in recent times. Obviously, you know, in the area of sports science, technology is always a big thing, and we're always looking at innovation and keeping, you know, ahead of our opponents. Where do you see it going, say, in the next 2 to 5 years? Where do you see technology and the use of technology in the area of sports science?
It could run away with us, I think, because there's so much money in the game. And that doesn't necessarily equate to so much quality technology coming into the game. And, you know, there's so many fads, and people can be sold by, well, this technology was used to prevent injuries, and this technology was used to create 20 more goals a season, and this technology was used to reinvent the wheel ultimately. So I think the practitioners and the people using the technology have got to be a bit more stringent in, well, does it really do what it says it does? But for me, and I don't want to sound sort of old school or dismissive, I'm a firm believer in the model that I use, and I want to evolve that model. So anything technologically that can help evolve that model, I'm going to embrace. And I think there's many managers and coaches that are exactly the same. They know how they want to play. So anything that is going to help them understand how they can evolve that way of playing from a technology point of view, I think that's what's going to be what's most embraced, if you like. But as I said, if I use the model, I know the model that the training model that I use in particular is, it's based on how a player in Australia, in Oman, in Wales, how their body responds, and that doesn't change. Their body, how someone's body responds to a 90-minute, 100-minute game doesn't change. There's a period of time where they need to recover. So if you understand that principle and you plan with or without technology and GPS or whatever it may be, you know, yes, some players may take slightly less than 48 hours to recover, but some players may take 68 hours to recover. You know that you need to set up your team in possession, out of possession, in transition. And the best time to do that is when they're not focusing on anything from a conditioning point of view. So the 2 days before a game, leading into a game, it's all about organizing them, because you're not going to develop anything from a fitness perspective in the 2 days leading up to that game. And then the middle part, as I said, for me, is that's when you know that you can really consider how you want to push them. So from a technology point of view, I want to know exactly have they definitely recovered, because I really want to push them to their limits. So any technology that allows me to do that in terms of the future for my domain, I would use. Just for those two particular days, if that makes sense.
And how do you manage coaches' expectations, Damien? Touched on it very, very briefly, but how do you manage a coach that, because if it was me and I've got the expertise of somebody like you alongside me, I'd use that to the hilt, because ultimately I'm going to want my players the fittest, at the best condition they can for each game. But not every coach is going to be. He's going to want his best player on the pitch, whether he's 100% or not. How do you manage that with your conversations with coaches, or is it not a problem?
No, it's a problem. Again, in my experience, there's using Vincent Kompany. He's probably the most ideal manager that anyone could want in so many ways, because my philosophy is I want every player fit for every game, and if I can achieve that, that's just fantastic. But there's so many processes that you've got to go through. But if you've got a coach, like you just said, that's their philosophy as well, then you can have a level conversation, and you can bring it back to that all the time. So if you're talking about planning a training week or planning a training session or series of cycles, and I'm saying, well, if you put those two together on consecutive days, you increase the risk of a soft tissue injury. Do you really want that? Because you might have two players unavailable for the game on Saturday. Or if you continue to do that, then you might create more and more problems over the course of the season. Do you really want that? So when a coach is open-minded and they want the same thing, it's an easy conversation. If a coach doesn't recognize that doing crossing and finishing every day is potentially through overuse, yes, you need repetition. Don't get me wrong. You need to take young players through repetition. You need professional players to repeat what they do to get better at it. But there's ways and means of doing that. But if you're speaking to a coach and doesn't recognize that by crossing and finishing every single day is creating the quad injuries that you're getting, or creating the groin injuries that you're getting, or creating the hamstring injuries that you're getting, it's a waste of time having a conversation. So it just depends on, you know, the person, I think, and the people that are having those conversations. And probably to answer your question, if you're having that conversation with that coach that doesn't understand that,
probably
you maybe should be seeking a different conversation with a different person somewhere else.
Damien, moving from coaches to players now and getting buy-in from the players that you're working with, how have you found that over the years? And you had an interesting story about Craig Bellamy at one point as well.
Yeah, I'll go back to the model again. If you've got, and it's the same with the coach, I think, if the coach has a game model and he explains the game model and he explains the intricacies of the game model and the rationale behind wanting to play that way, then that's always a reference. You can agree or disagree. It's the same for me in terms of buy-in from players. If you explain what you want to do and why, and you explain, more importantly for me, is, right, well, if you do this, you'll get this. And I want you always to be available for training and always available for games. And if you do this and don't exhaust yourself and tire yourself out, don't get me wrong, we're going to push you to your limits. But my philosophy is I want you fresh for the game and every game. And going on to the Craig Bellamy story, I was at Manchester City, and he'd come into Manchester City and he'd had, I think, 4 medial ligament injuries, knee injuries. He had an ACL. He'd had a history of hamstring injuries. And we sort of told him, you're not going to do the same level of loading as the team. And he just thought I'd just spoken in a foreign language. He just thought I was a clown. And I said, well, the reason why you've had so many injuries is, and it's true, he was such a good professional. He did every single thing that you asked of him at 110%. And his body was often screaming because he did everything at real high intensity. He's a very, very explosive player. So his body needed the same intensity, but less volume. So we had a training model where the team would do what you just saw Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, leading into a game. On the Wednesday, he would have a modified version of what the rest of the team did. So he was never accumulating fatigue. And he told me after, for the first 6 weeks, he actually wrote down every single warm-up, technical exercise, possession game, any aspect of training that he did, so that he could come back and say, see, that's a load of rubbish, what you're telling me, I'm injured again. And it was only when he started the season and then he stayed fit. I think he'd only ever played 15 games in a row at any of the clubs he'd been at, and he lasted the whole season. It was only towards the end of the season, he's a very proud guy, Craig, that he came and said, look, this is what I wrote just so that I could throw it back at you. But he actually said, thank you. You know, I appreciate you keeping me fit. And for me, it's not rocket science. It's understanding the individual within the team. But it's for me, it's only easy to do that if you have a reference, if you have a way of doing certain things, rather than flying by the seat of your pants.
Can I go next? Damien, I guess for a lot of the viewers, and myself included, who aren't too familiar with Belgium football or the football in Belgium, you're a consultant. Yeah, sorry?
Same thing, isn't it?
Same thing, yeah, exactly, yeah. You're involved with Anderlecht. The idea of sports science and the benefit that it can bring, is it really only, I guess, accepted by the clubs that have got the resources, or is it something that is accepted across the board compared to, say, what you've experienced in the UK and in the US?
I think there's many teams, even if you go into the depths of Europe, it's now commonplace that you will have a sports science representative, or you will embrace some form of sports science. For me, sports science is a little bit open for interpretation, because sports science used to be, all these anatomical terms and all these wonderful terms for energy systems and joints, and I think sometimes we've given ourselves a bad name. Ultimately, sports science is and should be wherever it is in the world, and you don't necessarily need a sports scientist to do it, is what you need to do to keep everyone fit. And it's as simple as, right, we train at light intensity here, then at high intensity, then we taper off leading into a game, then we repeat it. But we don't just repeat it week on week. We go slightly more, we increase the load slightly. So the time they get to the next game, they're slightly fitter. And if you do that over time, over the course of the season, you get fitter and fitter and fitter. And for me, that is sports science. It's not necessarily about cryotherapy chambers and all these wonderful, innovative technologies that will make you a better machine. It's a lot of it is about common sense, and you don't necessarily need a large team of people to be able to implement that.
Yeah, Craig, my question to you is, because you're quite involved with NPL clubs and at that sort of semi-professional or para-professional level, do our clubs here, at least in the western suburbs and what you're not, do they take this seriously, or could they take it a lot more seriously? And is it a question of resources? Because I know a lot of clubs sometimes have students, and do they really kind of students of social health science and what you're not? Do they acknowledge the importance of it enough?
Yeah, look, I think it's becoming more and more. Certainly, NPL would definitely have sports science coaches. I know my new club, George's, have a sports science department there, which they use. And I think it's becoming more and more prevalent now. At North Geelong, they didn't have a sports science, but they had physios that were very much looking after the players' welfare first and foremost, before the coaches. So, even when we were discussing squads as early as probably Tuesday, we'd have information from the physio as to where that player is based on whatever happened on the weekend. So whatever decision we made for the coaching aspect of the week would be based on the information that we get from the physio as such. But I think in the higher echelons of NPL now, I would be amazed if not everybody in certainly NPL 1 and 2 wouldn't have a sports science person or a development person within the group. And I think it's important, as I said, it's really important that we look after the players. It's certainly back in my day, I did my cruciate ligament at the age of 23 and 22 and had to give up football. Now, you look back at today's scenario, you have an ACL injury now, you're back within 8-9 months, because the science behind it all now has changed massively. The only person in my day was Paul Gascoigne that nobody ever heard of ACLs until Paul Gascoigne, and then everybody had an ACL injury. So it's changed, Tom, very much so over the last few years, for sure. It's become more prevalent. Yeah.
Definitely for the better. Damien, we're speaking with Damian Roden, who is a sports science consultant for Anderlecht in the Belgium League. Mate, we really appreciate your taking your time out. And we've had some technological issues earlier this evening, but we've managed to get through a very informative and educational interview. Gentlemen, I'll leave it with you guys. Any last questions for our guest? Craig,
I have one, but Steve's got one as well, I believe.
Oh, Steve,
I think we haven't fully touched on this yet, and I'll just explain from the from the example of a case study of maybe a state league club in Melbourne or Geelong here, and we're training on Tuesday and Thursday, and that's it. That's all we get with our players for the week. How can we best load those 2 training sessions so that the players are both recovering and getting their optimal performance when it comes to Saturday, and balancing that all out in just such a short time frame with just 2 sessions?
I usually use an illustration for this, and I'll maybe send you, Craig, some information that can be dispersed. But it's the principle that's exactly the same. If you play on a Saturday, train Tuesday, Thursday, playing on Saturday the following week, If you remember the visual that was just up in terms of the typical training week, Wednesday is typically when you do your conditioning work. And Thursday is, yes, you're tapering, but in the model itself, the model that we use is what's called the periodization model. It's 3 blocks of 2 weeks. And it's only related to really the Wednesday and the Thursday in that visual that you saw. So I'll do my best to explain without an illustration.
Do you want to go back to this? Do you want to go back to that document or not?
No, it's fine.
No, okay.
It should be clear. Ultimately,
this is making good sense to me so far, at least. So
yeah. Ultimately, you've got an overload day, which is your conditioning day, and you've got an underload day, which is the following day, and they work hand in hand. The periodization model relates to the overload day. So you've got 3 2-week blocks, which make 6 weeks. So the first 2 weeks of that block on that conditioning day, on that Wednesday, you would do conditioning through 11v11 games. So you might play 3 blocks of 10-minute 11v11 games, for example. The next week, you play 3 blocks of 11-minute games. So it's a slight increase, and you do that all the way through the season for the first 2 weeks of a cycle. The second 2 weeks of the cycle, you then move to smaller sided games. So on that conditioning day, you would go 7v7 games, and you might play 4 blocks of 5 minutes. And in the second week, you play 4 blocks of 5.5 minutes. And then a third block of that 6-week period, third set of 2 weeks, in week 1, you play smaller sided games, so maybe 4v4 games. And you do 12 blocks of 1-minute games. And then the next week, you play 12 blocks of 1.5-minute games. And these are all hypothetical examples. But if you understand that you work in blocks of 6 weeks where you can introduce those types of games, and you play big games in the first 2 weeks, medium in the second 2 weeks, small in the third 2 weeks, the cycle just keeps repeating. So that's on your Wednesday. So if you're talking about your part-time work, if you like, that session is on your Tuesday.
Yeah.
The Thursday session then, because it's closer to the game, you start to taper. But the overload session and the underload session work hand in hand. And it's a slightly different stimulus. So using the 6-week period, if you are playing 11-11 big games on that Tuesday for your conditioning, you play 7v7 games on that Thursday. But instead of playing it for long duration, you just play it for shorter duration. If you play 7v7 games on that Tuesday, on the Thursday you play 4v4 games. And if you play 4v4 games on the Tuesday, on the Thursday you play 11v11 games. And again, the reason I say I usually have a visual for this is that it's a lot clearer. So I'm hoping it's making sense for the listeners. And Craig, I'll send you some information if you like that can be disseminated if you want. But it's just about, you can do the same thing Tuesday, Thursday, play Saturday in principle as you would do if you're training Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's just a little bit more difficult. And that's why I advocate doing everything through playing football, particularly if you're playing training Tuesday, Thursday, because you haven't got as much time to do anything else or anything else in isolation. So do it through playing football because you're getting technical repetition. You're able to impart your tactical knowledge and what you want the team to do in that football environment. You don't have to isolate all the components. You're doing it through playing football. So hopefully, technically, tactically, psychologically, physically, you're improving even within a Tuesday and a Thursday environment.
Yeah,
that's the question.
That's an excellent answer, Damien. Thank you.
And I will take you up on that information as well. Philip Samo has said Raymond Verheiren's book is a great example of that, and I think you've done some work with Raymond in the past as well.
That is his model, and it's his model that I've been using for the past 12 years. And whilst I've evolved the model, and I think you saw on the video clip, I've sort of put some guidelines together that you can think about in relation to all the components of training that directly relate to that model. As I said, I wouldn't go and move and change anything about his model. I think it's fantastic, and I know he's done a lot of work in Australia in maybe the 2010 timeline. So a lot of people in Australia will be familiar with it, and it's a model that for me, you can't fail if you use it properly. Yeah, so yes, it is. It's exactly that.
Perfect. Well, talking about books, it's a great little link into to yours. You've got a book that's out or in the printers at the moment called I think Tonchi's got we've got a post or photo of that one, Tonch. It's called Fit for Every Game.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
First and foremost, just for me, what motivated you to write the book?
It was during my time at Manchester City when I was there when the Sheikh first took over the club, and I was the head of the medical and sports science department, and every head of department had to write a document that the Sheikh could look at that told him exactly what the department did. So I had to do that for the Sheikh, and I sort of broke it into 4 key areas. So planning, prevention, conditioning, regeneration, and I felt that sort of encompassed everything in my world and everything that the people within my department did. So I had to do it for that purpose, but then because I'd structured it in that way, it helped me as a tool evolve all those different components. So over time, whenever I've been at another club, I've sort of said, well, this defined what we did and tried to impart that to all the people within the department. This is how we feed into the coaching and into the team. So I've just evolved it over time, and over time I was like, I've got quite a lot of work here, and it keeps evolving, and I'm quite pleased with it now. So it was really just, I thought, you know what, I'm going to put this into a book for one, because if I was starting out, there was nothing that helped me along my path, if you like. I had to learn from my mistakes, and I made the mistake of I couldn't communicate my knowledge because I was trying to use all the terminology that I got from my academic side, and I was trying to speak to coaches and players, and they were like, well, what's aerobic? And why are you telling me about anaerobic stuff and the phosphocreatine system? So I had to really, really dumb it down and simplify everything. So I've just tried to put everything in real simple language to help people sort of fast track and bypass my mistakes, if you like. Mm-hmm. But maybe home in on what I feel is sports science. There's lots of things that aren't there that I don't class as being important. So for me, planning is understanding what periodization is, having a model, and going through the full planning process. So even at part-time level, if you're training Tuesday, Thursday, if you know your fixtures at the start of the season, you can plan your whole season. Then you can break it down into smaller cycles, and then you can go into the greater detail of the training sessions themselves and the training week. And then it's about prevention, things like testing. Do you test? What types of tests do you use? Readiness to train. So just understanding how players are responding. And preparation. There's a lot of things players can do prior to come to training that bypass having to do loads and loads of warm-ups. And then the conditioning was right. What did the team do? What did the individual do? And are there other ways of using that same model? And then the regeneration section is just all about nutrition, education on nutrition that will help people. Recovery, things like sleep, what the benefits of sleep. And then the last part is rehabilitation. But everything from a rehabilitation point of view should link all the way back into the training model. So you're preparing players to go back into the training model, not preparing or rehabbing injury. You're rehabbing the injury for the sport, because you'd be surprised that a lot of that doesn't happen. Everything happens in isolation. So it's just trying to put all the things together in layman's terms so that a part-time coach could understand it and implement it without a big group of sports scientists or physiotherapists or people on hand.
Fascinating, mate. It has been, look, the whole sports science performance side of things, or side of player management, is an intriguing one. And as the sport evolves and develops and it becomes so much more of an athletics game or athletes game, it becomes all the more important. So, mate, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really, really appreciate you taking the time out. And you'll be able to now go off and get the puppy dog, I think, that you were supposed to be getting.
What breed is on the market likely?
Sorry?
What breed is likely to be on the table today?
Well, no, we've bought it. We're going to pick it up. It's a Cavapoo. So my children are really excited. I'm looking forward to sleepless nights again.
There you go. Fantastic.
You got
Thank you very much for the invite, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time, and apologies for the inconvenience earlier on. But thanks for coming on, mate, and hopefully we'll speak with you again soon. All right.
Thanks, Damien.
Thanks, Damien.
Good on you. That was Damian Roden. Fascinating interview, guys. Thank you very much. It has been a marathon session tonight, but we made it through, and that's the most important thing. And we'll be back next Sunday, 7 p.m. with some great guests. We were going to announce it earlier today, but I think we'll leave the suspense for a little bit later on in the week. And we've definitely got one signed. And we're hoping to sign another big name guest for next week. So a little bit more about that. Gents, have a lovely week. Catch you next Sunday. And thank you to all of our viewers who have been absolutely phenomenal on what has been a bit of a trying evening. So thank you very much for that. Good night.
Have a good week, guys.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.